No one understood Chinese at the meeting. Maid's daughter spoke calmly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The setting was one of the most important business meetings of the year, filled with some of the most influential leaders in the industry. A massive conference room, towering windows that let in the gleaming sunlight, and a sleek, polished table where the most powerful figures in the company sat. The room buzzed with conversation, the sound of papers shuffling, and the clicking of pens as figures in sharp suits discussed high-stakes financial strategies. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone had gathered to make a decision that would determine the future of the company, and no one could afford to make a mistake. Among the executives, there was a particular sense of urgency, but they didn't know that this meeting would be remembered for something none of them expected. Sitting quietly in the corner of the room, standing out like a shadow among the high-powered professionals, was a young girl. She wasn't supposed to be there, but her mother, the housekeeper, had brought her along to work that day. The girl, no more than 10 years old, was asked to remain quiet and unobtrusive. She sat in the back, her eyes following the movements of the adults, observing the rapid exchange of information, yet remaining completely invisible in their eyes. To them, she was just another unnoticed child in a room full of professionals. No one took a second glance at her, not even when she shifted uncomfortably in her chair, wishing she were anywhere but in this cold, intimidating space. The meeting continued as planned, with heated debates over investments and mergers, yet the young girl sat there, silent. Then, the moment that would change everything happened. The CEO, Mr. Thomas Warden, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue, had been discussing an overseas deal. He looked over at the child, and with a smirk, said, "I bet she couldn't even understand what we're talking about, let alone make a decision about it. Maybe I should let her join the conversation, huh?" His words were meant as a joke, a casual comment that went unnoticed by most in the room. But the young girl, who had been listening attentively, knew exactly what they were discussing. She had overheard her mother and the housekeeper talk about these matters before. And now, something inside her shifted. In that split second, when everyone was still laughing at the CEO's comment, the girl stood up. The room fell silent as she cleared her throat. Her voice, soft but confident, cut through the laughter. "Excuse me, sir," she said, "but actually, I believe there is an error in your analysis. The trade agreement with China won't work unless the language gap is addressed first." The room froze. No one knew what to say. Here was this little girl, speaking calmly and with authority in a language they didn't understand, Chinese. The room filled with silence as everyone looked at her, stunned. They had no idea who she was, nor did they realize that she could speak fluent Chinese. But in that moment, it became clear that the joke was on them, and the girl was about to change everything. The room remained still for what felt like an eternity, as the young girl stood there, her eyes calm, her posture steady. No one spoke for a moment, the executives frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The CEO, Mr. Thomas Warden, was the first to react, his mouth slightly agape as he stared at her, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Slowly, his expression changed from disbelief to something else, embarrassment. He cleared his throat and attempted to recover, but the damage had already been done. The quiet girl, whom they had all written off, had just outsmarted them. As the awkward silence stretched on, one of the senior investors, Mr. Charles Montgomery, leaned forward and finally spoke. "Excuse me, young lady," he said with a raised eyebrow. "Could you elaborate on what you're saying? What do you mean about the language gap?" The girl, who had already anticipated their reaction, nodded calmly. "The deal with China involves a lot of sensitive negotiations," she explained, her voice steady and clear. "Without understanding the nuances of the language, the entire agreement will be misinterpreted. You can't just rely on translations from the staff, it needs to be understood on a deeper level." The room was silent again, but this time, it was the silence of realization. They had all been so focused on their high-level discussions, their big data, and their market strategies, they hadn't considered the very thing that could make or break the deal: communication. The girl's words were simple, but they cut through the complexity of the situation like a knife. Mr. Montgomery looked at her, his eyes narrowing in thought. "I see," he muttered, and for the first time during the meeting, he seemed to acknowledge the young girl's presence, really seeing her. Another investor, Ms. Helen Davidson, who had been quiet up until that point, spoke up. "How do you know about all this?" she asked, her tone a little less condescending now. The girl smiled faintly, a glimmer of confidence in her eyes. "I overheard my mother and the other staff talking. They discussed some of the company's plans, and I just listened. I'm not saying I know everything, but I know enough to recognize that something here isn't right." Her honesty struck everyone in the room. It was rare for someone to speak with such clarity, especially someone so young, and even more so someone considered invisible by the very people who now realized her value. The meeting, which had been filled with back-and-forth business jargon just moments before, suddenly seemed irrelevant in comparison to the insights the young girl had just offered. The CEO, once the figure of authority in the room, now found himself at a loss for words. The realization hit him hard. He had underestimated her. He had thought her just a child, a mere accessory in the room, but now she was the one shedding light on a critical issue. The rest of the meeting went in a direction none of them could have predicted. Instead of discussing profits and losses, the focus shifted to how they could address the language barrier in the deal, how they could communicate more effectively, and what steps they needed to take to ensure they didn't overlook something as crucial as understanding another culture. By the end of the session, the room had completely changed. The young girl, once invisible, had not only captured their attention but had also earned their respect. The CEO, standing up to end the meeting, turned to her with a new sense of acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "You've taught us something important today, something we all missed." The girl simply nodded, her task done. As the executives filed out of the room, talking among themselves about the changes they would make, the girl stayed behind. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't just a child of the staff anymore. She was someone who had made a difference. As the days passed, the young girl's presence in the corporate world began to shift things. The meeting had ended with a sense of uncertainty among the executives, who were still processing the gravity of what had just occurred. For most of them, it was hard to admit that they had been so focused on their own expertise that they missed something so vital. But for the girl, things had changed in ways she never expected. Her mother, the housekeeper, had always told her to stay invisible, to never speak out of turn, to remain in the background. But that day, the girl had broken that unspoken rule, and now, she found herself in the midst of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. A few days later, Mr. Thomas Warden, the CEO who had once mocked her, called for a private meeting with her and her mother. The two of them were led into his office, a massive space that was as imposing as it was elegant. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with titles she couldn't even pronounce, and the floor was polished so perfectly it looked like glass. Mr. Warden stood by the window, looking out over the city, his expression unreadable. He turned as they entered, and for the first time, the girl could see the respect in his eyes. "I've asked you both to come here today because I owe you an apology," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. The girl, who had always been taught to remain silent, stayed quiet. She had no idea what was happening. "Your daughter," he continued, "has done something that most of us in this room could not do. She has saved this company from a major disaster, and for that, I am grateful." The girl's mother looked at her, surprised by the words. But the girl simply nodded, still unsure of what was going on. "I want to offer your daughter a chance," Mr. Warden said. "We are expanding our operations in China, and we need someone who can bridge the language gap. Someone who understands the culture, someone who can do what we failed to do." The girl's heart raced as she tried to process what he was saying. Was he offering her a job? But she was just a child, wasn't she? "I'm offering her a position as an advisor," Mr. Warden said. "A consultant for our team on this project." The girl's mother stared at him, speechless. "I know this is a lot to ask," Mr. Warden continued, "but I've seen what your daughter is capable of, and I believe she has a future in this company if she wants it." For the first time, the girl felt seen. The executives had always treated her as invisible, but now, here she was, being offered a chance to make a difference, to use her unique talents to help shape the future of a company. She looked up at her mother, who smiled, though there was still a hint of disbelief in her eyes. "Thank you," her mother whispered, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. "You're welcome," Mr. Warden replied, his tone sincere. "But this is just the beginning. Your daughter has proven that talent doesn't come in the shape we expect, and I want her to know that she can make a real impact here, if she wants to." The girl looked back at him, her eyes wide with the enormity of what he was offering. She had always dreamed of something more than the confines of her mother's world, but she had never imagined this. As she stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, she realized that her life had just changed forever. No longer would she be invisible. No longer would she be just the maid's daughter. She was now someone with power, someone who could use her voice and her skills to change the world around her. She wasn't just a child in the corner anymore. She was someone who mattered. In the weeks that followed, the young girl, now known as Emma, found herself thrown into a world she had never imagined. What had started as a simple meeting to discuss business strategies had snowballed into a life-altering experience. Her new role as a consultant was unlike anything she had expected. Despite her initial doubts, Emma quickly realized that her unique perspective and understanding of the complexities between cultures were exactly what the company needed. Her mother, still working as the housekeeper, was equally astonished by the changes in Emma's life. She had never imagined her daughter would be in the boardroom, consulting with top executives and advising on multi-million-dollar deals. Emma's first task was to help the team navigate a complex partnership with a major Chinese tech firm. It wasn't easy, as the stakes were high, but Emma's ability to speak fluent Mandarin and understand cultural nuances made all the difference. The executives, who had once brushed her off as just a child, now relied on her advice. They were amazed at how well she understood the delicate balance required to negotiate a deal between two very different business worlds. The meetings became a whirlwind of decisions, contracts, and strategic planning. Emma was no longer the quiet girl in the back of the room. She was the one everyone turned to for guidance when things seemed complicated. One day, during a particularly tense meeting, Emma noticed something that none of the seasoned professionals had picked up on. There was a subtle miscommunication in the way both sides were interpreting the contract, a potential loophole that could derail the entire deal. She spoke up, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the uncertainty in the room. "The terms here aren't being understood the way you think they are," Emma explained, pointing to a section of the agreement. "It's a misunderstanding of wording that could cause a major issue down the line." The room fell silent as everyone looked at the young girl. They had learned by now not to underestimate her. Mr. Warden, who had once mocked her, now stood beside her, nodding in agreement. "She's right," he said, his tone filled with respect. "We would have missed this." The moment was a turning point. Emma had earned the trust of the entire team. No longer was she just a consultant in name. She was now an integral part of the company's future. As the deal with the Chinese firm was finalized successfully, Emma realized that her life had shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined just a few months ago. She had become more than just the maid's daughter. She had become a force to be reckoned with in the corporate world. Despite all the changes, Emma never lost sight of her roots. She still visited her mother's house after work, still helped with the chores, and still carried the same humble attitude she had always had. But now, there was a new sense of pride in her step. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that talent could come from the most unexpected places. As Emma looked out the window of the office building that overlooked the city, she couldn't help but smile. Her journey had just begun, and she knew that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. As time passed, Emma's role within the company grew even more significant. She wasn't just seen as a young girl with a unique talent anymore. She had become a key figure in the business, someone whose judgment was valued and respected by the top executives. Her influence began to spread, and with it, her responsibilities. But with that newfound power came the pressure of expectations. Emma found herself juggling between her consulting work and her education. She had to balance the demands of her schoolwork, which her mother insisted she never neglect, with her increasing role in the company's high-stakes deals. Her mother, once shocked by the turn of events, now stood proudly by her daughter, encouraging her every step of the way. However, not everyone in the company was as accepting of Emma's rise to power. Some of the older executives, who had been in the business for decades, felt threatened by her insights and her ability to navigate the complex world of international business with ease. They had always relied on their experience, and now here was a young girl, still in school, making decisions that affected millions of dollars. One day, during a board meeting, Emma was asked to provide her perspective on a potential new partnership with a company in Europe. She spoke confidently, presenting her analysis of the market trends, the risks, and the potential benefits. Her argument was solid, her points well thought out. But there was a moment when one of the senior executives, a man named Richard Thompson, challenged her. "With all due respect, Miss Emma," he said, "you're just a child. How can you possibly understand the complexities of this deal? This is real business, not some game." The room fell silent as Emma faced him. She could feel the weight of his words, the doubt in his tone. But instead of backing down, she stood her ground. "I may be younger than most of you here, Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "but I've been listening, observing, and learning. I understand that this is a big deal, and that's exactly why my perspective is valuable. Sometimes, those of us on the outside can see things differently, and that's what you need right now. A different perspective." The room was still. For a moment, it seemed as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Thompson's response. The older man's face flushed with anger, but he couldn't argue with her logic. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I didn't mean to doubt you," he muttered, his voice low. "But I still think you have a lot to prove." Emma nodded. "I'm not asking for anyone's approval," she said quietly. "I'm just doing my job. And if I make mistakes, I'll own up to them." From that moment on, something shifted. Richard Thompson, who had once looked at Emma as nothing more than a child, began to acknowledge her contributions. The other executives, too, started to see her not just as a talented young girl, but as a valuable asset to the team. Emma's position within the company solidified further as she continued to lead negotiations, secure deals, and make critical decisions. But as much as her professional life flourished, Emma remained grounded. She never forgot her roots. Every evening, she returned to her mother's house, where the simplicity of home reminded her of how far she had come. Her mother, now a proud witness to her daughter's success, always reminded Emma of the importance of humility. "Remember, darling," her mother would say, "no matter how high you go, always keep your feet on the ground." Emma nodded, knowing that her mother's wisdom would continue to guide her through the complexities of the world she was navigating. In her heart, Emma knew this was only the beginning. She had proven her worth, not just to others, but to herself. And as she looked out at the city skyline, she felt a sense of pride and determination. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Emma had the power to shape her own future, and she would stop at nothing to make it count. As Emma's influence within the company grew, so did the challenges she faced. The work became more intense, the decisions more critical, and the stakes higher. However, no matter how much success she achieved, Emma always kept a humble heart. She knew the importance of staying grounded, especially in a world that constantly tried to pull her in different directions. But even she could not predict what would come next. One afternoon, a phone call interrupted her usual routine. It was Mr. Thomas Warden, the CEO. "Emma, I need you in the office immediately. We have a situation," he said, his voice unusually serious. Emma's heart raced. "What's happened?" she asked, already gathering her things. "Just get here as soon as you can," Mr. Warden replied. When Emma arrived at the office, she found a tense atmosphere in the boardroom. Several of the top executives were already there, and the air was thick with anticipation. Mr. Warden motioned for her to take a seat. "Emma, we've run into a serious issue with one of our international contracts," he explained. "There's a major discrepancy in the figures, and it could cost the company millions. The deal is about to fall through, and we need a solution, fast." Emma listened carefully, her mind racing as she processed the information. The problem was complex, involving legal loopholes and financial projections that didn't align. She could see the frustration on everyone's faces. These were seasoned professionals, some of the best in the business, and yet they were at a loss. "Do you think you can help us?" Mr. Warden asked, looking at Emma with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Simple mistake. There was a deeper misunderstanding between the two companies involved, a cultural misstep that had gone unnoticed by the team. As Emma worked, the tension in the room began to fade. She explained her findings in simple terms, breaking down the complicated issues with clarity and precision. The executives began to see the situation from a new perspective. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about understanding the business partners on a deeper level. By the time Emma finished her analysis, she had not only found the solution, but had also proposed a plan to rebuild the relationship with the international company. The room was silent for a moment, and then Mr. Warden stood up, his face filled with admiration. "You did it, Emma. You saved the deal." Emma smiled, but inside, she was humble. This wasn't just her victory. It was the result of everything she had learned, from the lessons of her mother's quiet strength to the insights she had gained by simply paying attention. As the executives left the room, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had once been the girl in the corner, invisible and unheard. But now, she was a vital part of this company, someone whose talents were recognized and valued. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Emma was ready for whatever came next. She had proven her worth, not just to the company, but to herself. And as she stood there, looking out the window at the city skyline, she knew this was just another chapter in her journey, a journey that was far from over. As the weeks passed, Emma's reputation continued to grow within the company. She was no longer just a young consultant, but a rising star, sought after for her insight and unique perspective. She had earned the respect of the most seasoned professionals in the industry, but with that respect came more challenges. The pressure to perform was heavier than ever. One day, Emma received an unexpected invitation. It was from one of the most influential investors in the company, Mr. Edward Jacobs, a man known for his ruthlessness in business and his sharp instincts. He had asked to meet her privately. When Emma arrived at his office, the first thing she noticed was how starkly different it was from the bustling corporate spaces she was used to. The walls were lined with vintage art, and a large oak desk sat in the center of the room. Mr. Jacobs, an older man with a commanding presence, stood by the window, looking out over the city. "Emma," he said, turning to face her, "I've been keeping an eye on you. Your work has impressed me." Emma felt a mixture of surprise and wariness. Mr. Jacobs wasn't a man who handed out compliments freely. "Thank you, Mr. Jacobs," she replied, her voice steady. He paused for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. "I have a proposition for you," he continued. "I'm aware of your background, where you come from, and the fact that you've been able to navigate this world with ease. But there's one thing that sets you apart from everyone else in this company." Emma's curiosity piqued. "What's that?" she asked. "You're not afraid to speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable," he said. "And that's why I want you to work with me on something important. There's a new deal in the works, and I need someone who isn't afraid to question everything, even if it goes against the grain." Emma felt a rush of excitement mixed with uncertainty. This was a chance to prove herself in ways she had never imagined. But she also knew that the road ahead would not be easy. "What's the deal?" she asked, her mind already racing through possibilities. Mr. Jacobs smiled, his eyes glinting with a mix of ambition and calculation. "It's a major merger," he said. "One that could change the landscape of this company. But there's a catch. Some of the terms are shaky, and I need someone who can spot potential pitfalls before it's too late. Someone like you." Emma knew that this was a turning point. She had worked hard to get here, but now, she was being asked to take a risk that could either make or break her career. "I'm in," she said without hesitation. The deal was risky, involving multiple companies and a complex web of financial negotiations, but Emma was up for the challenge. Over the next few weeks, she worked tirelessly, analyzing documents, making calls, and staying up late into the night to ensure every detail was accounted for. Despite the long hours, Emma felt more alive than ever. She was finally in a position where her voice mattered, where her insights were valued. As the day of the final meeting approached, Emma's nerves started to build. She knew the weight of the situation. If this deal went through, it could set her up for a lifetime of success. But if it fell apart, it could ruin everything. The night before the meeting, Emma couldn't sleep. She stayed up late, reviewing her notes and rehearsing her points. She needed to be perfect. The next morning, as she walked into the meeting room, she could feel the tension in the air. The room was filled with high-powered executives and investors, all watching her closely. Mr. Jacobs was there, sitting at the head of the table, his eyes focused on her. "Emma," he said, "take the floor." With a deep breath, Emma stood up. The room fell silent as she began to speak. She laid out the facts, pointing out the risks, the potential roadblocks, and the steps they needed to take to ensure the deal went through smoothly. Her analysis was sharp, her arguments clear. When she finished, the room was still. For a moment, it seemed like no one would speak. Then, Mr. Jacobs stood up, his face unreadable. He looked around the room and nodded slowly. "We're moving forward," he said. "Thank you, Emma." In that moment, Emma realized that she had done it. She had not only proven herself, but had set herself on a path that would change the course of her life. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she was no longer just a maid's daughter. She was a force to be reckoned with. As Emma walked out of the meeting room, her heart was racing. The deal had passed, the risks had been managed, and the merger was set to move forward. She had done it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had doubted her. Yet, as she stood in the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had proven her value to the company. She had earned the respect of the executives, but deep down, she knew there was more to her journey than just corporate success. For the first time, she found herself questioning what truly mattered. It was late in the evening when she returned home to her mother's house. The familiar scent of home, the worn furniture, the cozy warmth that had always been a comfort to her, greeted her as she walked through the door. Her mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her face lighting up with a smile when she saw Emma. "How did it go?" her mother asked, her voice filled with the gentle concern that Emma had always known. Emma set her bag down and sighed, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It went well. The deal went through." Her mother placed the spoon she was holding down and walked over to her daughter. "I knew you could do it." Emma's heart swelled at her mother's words. She had always believed in her, even when the world hadn't. Yet, something still felt off. She had worked so hard to get to this point, but now that she was here, she wondered if this was the life she truly wanted. Emma sat down at the kitchen table, her mind swirling with thoughts. She had proven herself in the corporate world, but at what cost? She had spent so much time trying to fit into a world that was never truly hers. The truth was, despite the success, she still felt disconnected from the very thing that had always grounded her: her family, her roots. "I'm proud of you, Emma," her mother continued, her voice soft and full of warmth. "But I can see it in your eyes. You're still not sure, are you?" Emma nodded slowly, the weight of her decision settling in. She had achieved so much, but she wasn't sure if this was the life she had imagined. She had become someone else, someone who was admired by her peers, but she wasn't sure if she had lost touch with the person she truly was. She had spent so long chasing success that she had forgotten to ask herself why she was chasing it in the first place. Her mother sat down beside her, taking her hand in her own. "Emma, you don't have to be anyone you're not. If this life doesn't make you happy, it's okay to walk away. What matters is that you find your own path." Emma looked at her mother, the one person who had always believed in her, no matter what. The woman who had sacrificed so much for Emma to have a better life. In that moment, Emma realized something she had been ignoring for so long. Success wasn't about how much money she made or how respected she was in the boardroom. It was about being true to herself, being happy with who she was, and finding balance between the life she had built and the life she truly wanted. With a deep breath, Emma stood up, a new sense of clarity in her eyes. She had worked hard to prove her worth, but now she realized that the most important thing was living a life that felt authentic to her. She hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you for everything, Mom. I think it's time for me to take a step back and figure out what comes next." Her mother smiled, squeezing her gently. "Whatever you decide, I'll always be here for you." And with that, Emma felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had worked hard, achieved success, and proven her worth to the world. But now, she was ready to focus on what truly mattered: her happiness, her family, and living a life that felt true to who she was. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Emma felt ready to embrace whatever came next on her own terms. In the months that followed, Emma embraced a new chapter in her life. After taking time to reflect on her journey, she made the bold decision to scale back from the corporate world and focus on what truly mattered to her. She had reached a point where success wasn't just defined by deals and profits, but by the fulfillment she found in living authentically. Emma didn't leave the business world completely, but she began to work with organizations that aligned more closely with her values, ones that prioritized people and community over pure profit. It was a refreshing change, and for the first time, Emma felt as though she was truly making a difference in a way that resonated with her heart. Her decision didn't come without its challenges. The people she had worked with in the corporate world were surprised by her shift in focus, and some even questioned her decision. But Emma wasn't swayed by their doubts. She had learned the hard way that no amount of success or recognition could replace the sense of peace that came with staying true to oneself. She also found a deeper connection with her family, especially with her mother. Their bond had always been strong, but now, with Emma stepping into a new role, she was able to spend more time with her mom, helping her with the house, and learning new things about her own life and values. One evening, as Emma and her mother sat on the porch watching the sunset, her mother spoke in a quiet, thoughtful voice. "I've seen so much of you in these past few years, Emma. I've watched you grow into someone I can't even recognize sometimes, but in the best way." Emma smiled softly. "I've learned a lot from you, Mom. About strength, about resilience, about the importance of staying grounded." Her mother's eyes softened. "You always had the strength in you. You just needed to find it, to trust yourself." Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had learned so much over the past few years, not only about business, but about herself. She had proven that no matter where you start in life, no matter the obstacles or the expectations placed upon you, the real measure of success was how true you stayed to yourself. And that was a lesson that would stay with her forever. As Emma looked out at the horizon, she realized that life was not about climbing the highest mountain for the sake of recognition, but about enjoying the journey and finding peace in the moments that truly mattered. She was no longer the girl who felt invisible, no longer the girl who needed to prove herself to the world. She had become someone who had earned her place, not just in the boardroom, but in her own life. It was a different kind of success, one that filled her with purpose and joy. And as she sat there with her mother, surrounded by the simplicity of home, Emma knew that this was just the beginning of a new adventure. She had learned to embrace life's uncertainties and to trust that the path ahead would unfold in its own time. With a sense of peace in her heart, Emma smiled. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had already achieved the greatest success of all, being true to herself.